couple of times. We had some tropical storms sitting over our area, and the first time we lost it was, I think we had like 24 inches of rain in a couple of days, and we had a flash flood, and it just took out the dam. Well, being in the heavy equipment back then, having John Deere Construction, I got the county agent out there to take a look at it and kind of survey it and give me an idea of what we needed to do. And he said, "You can't rebuild this lake." I said, "What do you mean you can't rebuild it?" He said, "Well, there's not any clay around here. It's all sand." And I said, "Well, we'll find clay." He said, "How are you going to find clay?" I said, "There's always clay somewhere." So I brought up a
excavator,
probably a $350,000 excavator that had a 60-foot reach on it. So I had one of my guys that worked for me that used to demo equipment. He took off a week, and I paid him to rebuild the lake. So he dug down maybe 30 feet and found clay. So after a week's worth of work, we added new spillways and everything else, and did something that the county agent said that we couldn't do, and rebuilt the lake, and which was not cheap, but something that we had to do.
Yeah. And the guy that drove the excavator had been over in Iraq helping put out the fires after the Gulf War, right?
He would, when he'd take his vacations, he would go over there, and back then he would make $150 an hour over in Iraq putting out fires, and I mean, he really had some unbelievable stories to tell. Some of the stuff that he went through and what he saw, and all the oil fields that were on fire, and he would take some of the heavy equipment with this excavator that I was talking about. And of course you have to be careful what you're doing. One of the stories that he used to tell is they would get some inexperienced drivers, and they would get up there and they would take that excavator, and what you had to do on a lot of them, if they didn't blow out the fires with dynamite, if they were coming out of like a 6-inch pipe, what they would do is take that long arm off the excavator and they would bend that pipe over till it crimped and put the fire out. And he said a couple of guys would, when they would crimp it, would bring it toward them, and it was like blowing them up with a blowtorch.
And he was working with Red Adair's bunch of Boots and Coots, wasn't it?
He was working with Boots and Coots, yeah.
Red Adair, famous person for putting out oil fires around the world. And they called it, there was one called the Devil's something or other, I can't remember the name of it, but a famous fire he put out that had been burning for years. But yeah, so he was a very interesting guy. Do you remember his name by chance?
Ken.
Ken?
This is my third Datsun, fourth Datsun.
Fourth, yeah.
This is Dixie. We've got another one running around here. Dixie's about 8.5 pounds. We've got another one that's running around that we got about 6 months after Dixie that's called Muffin. And Muffin's about a 14.5, 15-pound Datsun. But she'll show up here sooner or later.
Right. So who were some of the famous people we had out to the pig farm? I remember we had the president of the Tournament of Roses. Remember his name offhand? I can't remember his name.
I'll think of it in a minute.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other famous folks we have out the farm?
No, we had one of my best friends that I hunted with was Nelson Rushi. Had Ken Collinger that was a vice president of Shell Oil. Had the president of Ron. Had it was a president of Citco, and had Cisco Foods, had one of the controllers at Cisco Foods come out. Just, you know, had the preacher Todd Adams come out with the, they would come quite a bit, and just, you know, a lot of businessmen, a lot of friends.
No, no. So, your sister was born where, and what was her full name?
My sister was also born in Navasota, Pamela Isbell.
And what day was her birthday?
She was born in October 21st, and she was 2.5 years older than me.
She was born in what, 48?
No, she was born in 44.
Hey, you're born in 46. She's
Yeah.
older than you?
Yeah, she's
Oh,
older
she's
than
older. Oh,
me.
I thought you were older than she was.
No,
I didn't realize that.
She's 2.5 years older than me.
Oh, okay. I guess I missed that part. And then the affiliation with the Disciples of Christ Church. So, was Biddy Mama Disciples of Christ, or was
My
it just...
uncle was a preacher, Bill and Judy Wright. Judy was my mother's sister, and Uncle Bill was the Disciples of Christ preacher, and that's where we got our affiliation and started with the Christian church.
But was Bill based in Houston, or where was he based?
So Bill's based at he was based in Wichita Falls, but he worked all over. He worked in Louisiana. He worked in Eugene, Oregon, Wichita Falls, Houston, Texas.
Worked in Atlanta, Colorado.
Yep.
But how did Mimi end up deciding to join the Disciples of Christ Church? Was her mother Baptist? Was Biddy Mama Baptist or
Big Mama, I believe, was Methodist.
Methodist?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it wasn't. I'll take that back. That was a Disciples church in Temple.
Okay. And do you know how Uncle Bill met Aunt? I'm losing it. What's your aunt's name?
Judy.
Aunt Judy. Yeah.
Judy Wright. Bill Wright. I'm not sure how they met, but he was also in the Navy, and he was a chaplain in the Navy, and served in Midway, and the rest of the time he was a minister.
Yep. And so then he had several strokes, left him unable to speak, and they sort of retired to Shreveport, which was their home base.
Right.
And they served at the church on, I think, Kings Highway, I think is what the name
Kings
is.
Highway Christian Church.
Yeah. And the Christian
Shreveport.
churches you and Mimi went to, which ones did y'all attend in Houston?
First one I went to was Bethany Christian,
Okay. Where was that located?
and that was located near Lamar High School. I forgot the name of the street that it was on.
Right. And then you ended up going to Memorial Drive?
Memorial Drive Christian
Church.
Church, which is about 4 blocks away from our house,
Uh-huh.
so it made it really convenient.
Okay. And then you built this house up here on the mountain. What year did y'all build this house?
7.5 years ago.
7.5 years.
Yep.
And then you have another house over on Lake Burton on the golf course over there?
We got a lake house that's about 22 miles from here that's on Lake Burton, and it's on the golf course called the Waterfalls.
That's a pretty place. Okay. So,
We just buy houses, we don't ever sell.
yeah, right, I know.
Since we own 4 right now.
Right. Well, what memories do you have of your childhood before moving to Atlanta with your parents, your grandparents, and miscellaneous stories?
There's not a whole lot that I remember about my dad, except, you know, I remember the last year and a half that back then they didn't leave you in hospitals. He was bedridden really most of the time I knew him, but I do remember going out with him to Lakeside Country Club, and I would go out there with him. I was probably 4.5, 5 years old, and would go out there, and I remember him working with Ralph Plummer and again designing the golf course, and remember all the heavy equipment and stuff that was moving dirt and watching them get out their survey equipment. And do remember him. We would go down to Galveston and go crabbing a lot, and come back home and have a great big boiling pot out in the yard, and he loved to cook crabs, and that's really about all I remember about him.
Yeah. So then, when your father died, your mom and your sister took some trips across the United States driving. So did you do that like for several summers, or how many
Yeah,
trips?
we did that over a period of a couple of summers.
And Pop was with you at that time?
No, Pop was
It wasn't?
not. No, it was just us.
Just us. Y'all
Yeah.
just took off. How long would those trips last? You remember?
Of course, it was usually during the summer, and Mother was a
She was
school
teacher.
teacher,
Right.
so they would last a month and a half sometimes.
Do you remember many of the places that you went?
Oh, yeah, we went to Colorado, New Mexico, Grand Canyon, all really in the northwest area.
Yeah. Hey, Dixie, come on. So when you were in high school, what kind of sports did you play?
I played football and basketball and drinking.
And drinking? And then at TCU, what kind of activities were you involved with your fraternity, and what else? What kind of stuff did you do?
Really, mainly just the fraternity, and played intramural football, and again did a lot of partying. Dixie, come here. Yeah, did a lot of partying, a lot of studying, and had a good time.
Yeah. So you had a couple of car accidents when you were in college.
We don't talk about
We're
that.
not going to talk about
No.
that. Well, it's a small one. You're still here. That's an amazing story. But so then you, before the Dachshunds, what pets did you have throughout your life?
First pet was named Trixie. That was a terrier that we had in Atlanta, Georgia. And then when I went to college, my senior year, my roommate and I, which was Jimmy Stewart, we bought a white German Shepherd named Sir. So we had Sir, and then had a Princess, was a Basset Hound, and then from then on it's always been Dachshunds.
Yeah, and we adopted Princess. Did somebody own Princess? I know we adopted her.
Princess was found by a vet and run away during a storm.
Huh.
And so we just inherited Princess from the vet.
Well, she was a sweet dog. Then you had the Dachshunds. And there was an episode where Sir helped you stop the car while you were flying down the road. You want to talk about that story?
Or what?
Where he put his hand on the shifter and
Yeah, we had Sir in college, and I was driving down the street.
what kind of car?
It was a, I believe a 65 Impala, and Sir was in the back seat, and the shifter was on the console, and if you pressed down and pushed up, it would go in reverse. And thank goodness I was only going about 15 miles an hour, but Sir jumped from the back seat into the front seat and hit that shifter, and you will stop when you throw it in reverse, going about 30 miles an hour.
So, what parts of the world have you been to other than the U.S.?
Yeah, I've been all over. Been to Ireland, been to London 5 or 6 times, been to Paris, been to Belize, been all over the islands on the East Coast, been to Hawaii 7 or 8 times. And again, one of the things, our travel, a lot of these were conventions, and a lot of these were trips that we won. So really during my business time, I really never took a vacation, because I would vacation during all the conventions, whether they were in Hawaii or Marco Islands or Boston or Las Vegas or Reno or just all over the United States. and all over the world.
Yeah. So you also went to Africa. Was it Morocco you went to?
We've been to Africa twice on a photo safari, and which were probably the greatest experiences that of any vacation. It's Mary's company used to have a safari operation, hunting operation, and they would also on the off season you could stay at the camps, and the guides would take you on photo safaris. So the first time Mary and I went by ourselves and just had such a great time. We stayed in tents. Of course, they waited on you hand and foot. Now, when I say you stayed in a tent in Africa, these tents had king-size beds, and they had bathrooms, and if you wanted a shower, you'd call the porter, and they would pour hot water in a 5-gallon bucket and raise it up on a pole, and then you would come through a hose, and so you had a shower in the tent. And they had at night we would eat off of china and crystal and silver and
White tablecloth.
white tablecloths, and we had our own personal guide and driver. And the first time we stayed a week, and we liked it so much. 4 or 5 years later, we put together another trip to Africa with 10 of our friends, including Mark and Vanessa, went. We took them, and we had 10 people. We had three hunting guides, and we went to probably 4 different camps, and it's just amazing. It's amazing the number of animals that you see. And one of the biggest animals was Mark, because he got engaged while he was there. So.
On the last night, yeah, it was on her father's birthday too. So yeah, we got on the satellite phone and called the States. And that was a year to the date exactly when I had met her. I'd met her in Tampa, Florida on March 19th in '05. And this was March the 19th, '06, which was our last night in the Serengeti. So, so there's another picture of you sitting on a camel. Isn't that Morocco or someplace? Where were you
That
sitting?
was in Morocco.
You were in Morocco. And how long were you in Morocco?
We just flew over there for 1 day from Paris.
Okay.
But that was kind of a funny trip, because we got to Morocco and had all the tents and camels and Arabians on camels going through the tents while we were eating. And one of the funny things is when we were going to leave, we had a chartered jet, and there was about 120 of us. And we get on the plane, and they said, we having a problem. Now, we were on a trip from Exide Batteries, and they said they won't let us leave. They want a ransom. So, everybody's sitting there, and of course, this was one of our big suppliers, and of course, everybody's saying, well, what's the deal? I didn't really get how much they had to pay, but I think they had to pay like $10,000 to get us out of Morocco.
That's funny. So let's talk about hunting and fishing. So you basically taught me how to hunt deer and dove and so forth from the time I was 16 in college. And there was one episode where I was out in a stand, and the hunting lease was out near Roosevelt, Texas, right off I-10.
Right.
West of, what was the other town out there? They had the hospital.
I forgot.
Kerrville? It's Kerrville?
No, it was further out than Kerrville.
Okay, yeah. But anyway, so I shot this deer and I wounded it. I was chasing it around in the bushes. I was taking pot shots at it with a 30-06, the 360 Game Master, which had a clip of 4, and you could chamber one. And then I ran out of bullets.
Well, other son, David and I were hunting in another stand. And of course, I hear all this shooting going on. And David says, David was probably what, you were 16
I was
then?
probably 17 or so.
Yeah. So David was 9
Yeah.
9 years old at the
Yeah.
time, and he said, "Do you think Mark got anything?" I said, "I don't know. I doubt it. He's shot too many times." I said, "But let's get down and we'll go over there." So I drive over to his stand and I start yelling for Mark because he wasn't in his stand. And all I hear is, "Bring more bullets." I get over there and he's sitting in the middle of a mesquite tree, and he's sitting on top of a deer, and he's got its 2 front feet, and the deer is kicking up and down, and Mark says, "Shoot it." I said, "Mark, I can't shoot that deer. You're laying on top of it." I said, "Here's my knife. I can't get in there. You're going to have to cut its throat." He said, "I can't do that." And I said, "Well, you don't really have a choice, because I'm not shooting that deer, and I can't get in there. Now, you can either turn him loose and figure out what's going to happen, or you can cut his throat." So he ended up cutting the deer's throat.
Yeah, I'd do that. So then there was a time we took cousin Jimmy out there, and the agreement was with the folks on the lease that we're not going to shoot any more bucks because get towards the end of the season, they want the bucks to get bigger. And Jimmy was a guest, obviously. Jimmy Miller, my first cousin. And he had one instruction: do not shoot a deer with horns on it.
And he shot a 10-point.
Yeah.
He said he thought it was a doe.
Shot it right in the guts. So, I'm over there with him, and Bubba and David come up, and of course Bubba's ticked. And he's so ticked he didn't hang around to help us clean the deer. He takes off and says, "Y'all got to clean that damn deer yourself." I got to go back and explain what happened and try to keep people calm. And so Jimmy, who was weak in the stomach, once I cut that deer open, he has guts all shot up on the inside, stunk like all hell. Jimmy starts going over there throwing up, and so I had to clean the whole damn mess by myself and take it back in, and then I had to take the blame for shooting the damn thing, and I didn't even shoot it. Because, so it was a bad situation all the way around, but Jimmy has that dang deer mounted in his mom's house in Macon, Georgia. And that was the last time he went hunting with us.
Yeah, David and Mark, we did a lot of hunting, a lot of deer hunting, shot hogs, quail hunting, did a lot of bass fishing.
Yeah, and how did y'all know Noel Sanders?
Noel was a family friend forever. He knew my dad and my mother, and grew up with him, and he had a place right near Navasota, and had a great fishing lake, and we'd go up there before we got the pig farm and go fishing.
Yeah, so Bubba would make us get up at all hours on a Saturday morning, drive all the way up to Navasota, and go fishing in a lake full of stumps.
One of the stories I got to tell about Mark, now Mary and I were dating at the time, and this may be the first time I took him fishing, and of course Mary had made sandwiches and got cold drinks in the cooler, and it was about an hour and 15-minute drive up there. And of course we'd had a good day morning of fishing, and we were sitting in the car fixing to eat lunch. And we're eating sandwiches, and Mark was going to the back of the car. Now remember, we just had dated a few times, and she asked Mark to get him a drink. And Mark came back and said, Mary said, "Where's my drink?" And he kind of smarted off to her and said, "Well, I'm too tired to go back there and get you a drink." So, and he didn't bring her one. So I tried to keep my mouth shut, which I did. And so Mary goes back and gets a drink because she didn't want to start a commotion, since we'd only dated a few times. And we get back up to the house to thank Noel for fishing in the lake. Now, Bubba's from the school of discipline because Papa and Bit of Mama and my mother didn't really put up with any crap. So we got up to tell Noel bye, and it's probably I don't know, half a mile, quarter of a mile down to the lake from the house. And as we get ready to get back in the car, I looked at Mark and I said, Mark, you were too tired to get your mother a drink. And I probably would have told you this, but when we left the boat, you left your tennis shoes next to the boat. Now let's see if you're too tired to run down there and get your shoes. So that was the start of the Isbell School of Discipline.
Yeah, and it was a long and troubled school. Yeah, and I ran across Noel again in the funeral home business when I worked for Hill Team Manor Funeral Chapel in Austin, Texas from 89 to 90 as the night receptionist, and he, I guess, did some business with Morris Homan, who owned the operation. Morris was actually shot by Charles Whitman August 1st, 1966 from the University of Texas Towers, one of his claims to fame, and was good friends with Noel, and I guess Noel sold some caskets to Morris from time to time. He came over there one time, actually, while I was working for Morris. That was probably the last time I saw him, but he was typical of the funeral home industry, had a very dry sense of humor, very funny guy. He was a lot of
Great guy.
a lot of fun. He was something else. So then we took another chartered fishing trip with some of your business associates out of Surfside that we went out of.
Went out of Freeport.
Freeport,
Yep.
yeah. And you want to tell them how that day went?
Well, we had a pot I had a bunch of customers and took Mark along and had a pot for the biggest fish. Well, Mark spent most of the day throwing up and
I almost threw up. I didn't throw up, but the thing is, I sat up on the command tower up high. We had 6-foot seas, and so the command tower is moving twice as much as down in the bottom of the boat, and I got seasick.
so he'd only fished for about 10 minutes. And he ended up catching a shark, which was the biggest fish of the day, so he ended up winning the pot.
A 35-pound hammerhead, and I took that Dramamine, and it knocked me out, so I went and got in the bed in the hull of the ship and slept the rest of the trip and won the pot.
So for me, it was kind of a waste of money to pay for him a trip, but he kind of liked it since he won the big pot.
That's right. That's right. Nobody else really thought that was great, but... And then we went white-winged dove hunting down Sabinas Hidalgo. Had a lot of fun doing that. Jimmy Stewart stayed up too late and got sick one morning. We were driving on the bus out there. So, why are you sick, Jimmy? So I stayed up too late. Said, I didn't know stay up too late would make you throw up.
Yeah, there were a lot of people. I probably hunted down at Sabinas Hidalgo 15 times with the kids, customers, and friends, and there was also always somebody sick, but I really think most of it was too many margaritas.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, on our last day, and I mean, there were so many dove down there. We'll talk about the hunting first. The hunting was great. As Bubba, you clean up, what, about 400 plus birds in 3 days or something?
Yeah, usually.
Something like that. Shooting his Satori over an under 20 gauge. And I thought that having an unplugged pump would actually help me out some, but after the first 2 shots, you don't really have much opportunity. You end up blasting the atmosphere full of lead and not getting anything. So after first couple of hunts with the pump, I realized 5 shots wasn't any better than 2, so I went with the Satoris. I started getting better at it. But I was shooting pretty good by the end of that. Well, then the last day we were there, the food had all been fine, and it was a nice place. Had, a bar built into the pool with stools in the pool. You waited on handed foot 24/7, whatever you wanted, you asked for it, and I'd bring it to you. And I woke up the morning we were supposed to go back to Monterey and get on the plane, and I realized that my dinner had not digested. I still had a stomach full, and very shortly after I got out of bed, I realized that I was not going to be well. It was not due to partying. And got up and emptied my stomach, and then continued to try and turn my inside out. And then I had to get on the bus and ride in the back. There was a bed in the back, and go bumpity bump all the way back to Monterey, feeling miserable. Then get to the airport, just out of energy and still sick and throwing up. Montezuma's revenge, and managed to get on the flight, Aero Mexico. It's probably like a DC-9. And we come in sort of wild and willy into Houston Intercontinental Airport. It's the first time I ever looked at the runway before actually going to land on it. The plane was tilted over to the right, and I could see the runway. It's like I've never seen the runway at this angle before. We're coming into it, so they were a little bit wild the way they flew the plane. And then after we landed, I was sitting next to Jamie Stewart, and I grabbed the air sick bag because I knew I was going to be sick, and I start throwing up. And we're taxiing. He freaks out, jumps out of his seat, runs over to his dad. The flight attendant's like, "Get back in your seat." It's like the guy's getting sick, So. It was not a good time. I stayed sick for another probably 24, 36 hours. It was bad. Bad. And then we had the hunting jeep out in it was Junction I was trying to think of.
Junction,
yeah. Out in Roosevelt. And that VW thing that had been turned into a hunting vehicle sometimes wouldn't start. And you had to sit out there in the cold and wait for that thing to start sometimes.
Wait for somebody to come pick you up and push start you.
Right. But if it was at night and the sky was clear, you see satellites. We saw all kinds of... It was great star watching while you're sitting there waiting for the car to cool down so you can start it again and so forth. And so then... back to the School of Discipline, I seem to have problems following direction. Of course, Bubba married Mom when I was 16, and to say that he and I are both hard in the head would be to greatly underestimate the matter. And taking out the trash was never something I was very manic about, and so there was a certain episode of my not getting the trash out that caused some repercussions.
Well, of course, Bubba never gives up, so, and Mark was pretty stubborn back then. Because he hadn't had authority they'd been divorced a long time, and he didn't really have a male authority around, so he never would take the trash out. We would put notes there's only twice a week, so we'd put notes on the bathroom mirror, trash days Thursday and Friday, and take the trash out before you go to school. And of course, he would always forget. And you'd take away the car, you'd take away the TV, you'd take away weekends. Well, that never worked. Well, I came home early one day. I came home about 2:30, and all the trash had not been taken out. Now, I was not in a good mood because I had not had a good day at work. So I took the trash, and this was with all the coffee grounds and eggshells and bacon grease and everything else, and I went to his bedroom and I took his pillows off and I dumped the trash out of the bag into the bed, covered it back up and left it there. And of course we were going to have company from San Francisco that day. And when Mary got home, she said, "You got to clean this up." I said, "I'm not cleaning this. Mark hadn't gotten home from school." I said, "I'm not cleaning it up." And the friends were coming. And so when they came, Mary was showing them the house, and she apologized for the Mark's room with the trash underneath the bedspread because you could smell it. And the guy said, "I've had that same problem, and I can't wait to get home to do this." Of course, I never said anything to Mark, and Mark never said anything to me. But lo and behold, for some reason, he never forgot to take the trash out.
Yeah. So you had some pretty epic work stories as well, as far as some crazy things that went on during your career with Stewart and Stevenson. You mentioned one about, we talked about the other day, where your sales manager liked to have a sales meeting every week and wanted you to be there. Talk about it. And how did that go down?
Well, of course, back then it was working on straight commission. Did have expenses paid for, and you're on your own. Whatever you do, you make. And of course, he wanted call reports every week, and which I hated to fill out because to me it was a waste of time. I was calling on people and I was working, and he had the sales meeting at like 6:30 on Thursdays or Fridays, and I can't remember where it was, a Thursday or Friday. But this particular day, I probably was at the first customer at 6:30 in the morning, and I worked all the way till 6:30 at night and through lunch, and I had like 6 or 7 customers. I'd sold like 48 lift trucks. And man, you know, 48 lift trucks is a 9 months business for most salesmen. You know, you just don't sell 48 lift trucks in even 6 months, and I sold that in a day. When I walk in the sales meeting, I'm about 45 minutes late, and the salesman starts eating my ass out. Sales manager starts eating my ass out. And of course, you know, I'm on a high that you know, had such a great day that I finally said, well, you know, I've been working. And he said, I don't care what you've been doing. And I just took all the orders and threw them on his desk and said, here, I'm leaving. I'm tired. And I walked out of the room. And that night, the division manager that he reported to, he was in Mexico white wing hunting with some customers. And he said, I hear about the sales meeting. And he said, I want to apologize. He said, I want you, and it didn't really discuss what happened or anything else. He said, I'm down here white wing hunting with some people from Drillco, and I want you to go get on an airplane at our chance and come down here and spend 3 days white wing hunting. And his name was Lehman Tanker. I said, Lehman, I said, I've got so much work to do tomorrow, following up on these orders, making sure they get ordered right and everything else, and I really didn't end up going. But, you know, it was nice to at least have somebody appreciate what you did instead of the sales manager chewing you out for having such a good day at work.
There was another time where you had a salesman who was feeding leads to a competitor. And I just sniffed that out.
Well, the salesmen were complaining that there was too many. This one competitor was everybody's was quoting everybody, that all our salesmen. He was in on all the quotes.